Episode 9, recording at the Nextgen studio, where some of the best ping pong in the world is played.
And we added shuffleboard.
And shuffleboard now. Boss toss, cornhole.
Need to get to where we have enough for a decathlon.
Yeah. There we go. We got a dartboard. We just haven't put it up yet. Now everyone's probably listening to this thinking we don't work at all. Sometimes.
Anyway, let's talk some Pivot Bio.
Yeah, wanted to talk more about Pivot Bio again. I think really what I wanted to focus on today with Pivot Bio was kind of our past experiences with, okay, where can we replace nitrogen, how much, given the form of nitrogen we're cutting out, and just how guys can, make Pivot Bio a part of their nitrogen program.
Yeah, because we've dealt with it the last 5 years.
6 now.
6, dang. Well, I mean, it's just there's so many misconceptions around it, and I guess you could say from other competitors as well, saying they have the same thing. It doesn't work. We tried it here and saw nothing, but there's so much more than that, and a lot of it goes to stewardship and what you're trying to accomplish. And really, at the end of the day, it's nitrogen. So I guess you could say it's technically a biological, but there's an actual specific purpose for it. And if you're not cutting back what it's supplying you, you might as well go dump another 40 pounds on your corn and see if it works. I mean, really, essentially, that's what what it is.
Yeah, well, like in previous episodes, we've talked about how, the best way to use Pivot Bio in that nitrogen program a little bit. But I wanted to get into some of our trials that we've done over the last 5 years.
And there's a shitload of them.
Yes.
300?
I mean, yeah. I think, over 250 for sure.
Yeah.
So, we've done a lot of different comparisons over the years, and really what we've seen, if you're already applying enough nitrogen for the crop, and nitrogen's not your limiting factor, we don't want you just to add Pivot Bio on top of that program, because you're probably not going to see a good ROI. And we're going to put a lot of these different trial results up on the screen here throughout this episode, in case you haven't been able to attend one of our trial meetings. But if there's no nitrogen being replaced and you're adding it on top, we're seeing, as low as like a 10 to 15% win rate, because typically in our area where it's irrigated corn, and don't get me wrong, there's a fair amount of dry land corn too, but like in that irrigated scenario, those guys are maybe pulling a couple tissue samples, like they're really trying to monitor nitrogen, and that's one nutrient where we don't see a lot of deficiencies in. Maybe late sometimes, if guys, if we get a big rain, we leach some nitrogen out, but typically nitrogen's just not one of our limiting factors, because it's, I think we've talked about it before. It's that mindset of, it's pretty easy to throw a little more nitrogen out there to make sure, you've got plenty out there for what you think your yield potential is. And so if you're not going to reduce nitrogen, and use Pivot Bio, just know that you got a smaller chance of having a really good ROI.
Yeah. And especially around here, I mean, that's the one nutrient nobody's scared of. They will go buy it, they will go apply it, they will put more on if things are looking good. That's their one go-to. Usually the price point's good, and they will dump it on as much as they can. But they've seen a return out of it. And that's kind of what I always go back to. It's like, well, a lot of, not saying that you need to go, move in the same direction as everybody, but after a lot of years, a lot of guys will see, you kind of notice a trend of they're using, what they're doing is what they've seen a return on. Like zinc is just a common practice around here. A lot of guys, they'll just throw in zinc. I mean, a lot of times the retailer said, "Oh yeah, throw some zinc in," but along the way, probably the more forward thinkers said, "Hey, we do need some zinc," or some forward thinking agronomists like, "Oh man, we did get a return on that." So now it's kind of a year in year out deal with a lot of guys with something like zinc, but it pays. I mean, along the way, they're finding things that pay, and around here, even a local guy, he I mean that's why he dumps the nitrogen on. He knows that nitrogen's going to pay. So last was it 2 years ago we had a big spring rain in his sandy soils, and he didn't even blink an eye. He's like, "All right, well we're loading it up with more nitrogen, more than," and he already put a lot on. But he was so scared to starve that plant of nitrogen that he didn't even think twice about it or what it was going to cost because he knows he's getting that return on it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of tougher economic times is because guys do watch their inputs a little bit more. And that's why it's important to do some trials and to really figure out what the crop actually needs instead of just what's standard practice of, how many pounds you're applying for a certain yield goal. Because when things are tough, you do need to know what pays and what doesn't pay. And if you know, the right amount of nitrogen to apply on the good years, when corn is $8 a bushel, and it makes it easier, and you can make those decisions with more confidence when corn's $4, and you're going to use those dollars more wisely. And with Pivot Bio, a part of that, like yeah, it's kind of easy this year because it's so much cheaper than synthetic nitrogen. I mean, most UANs probably around that 80 cents per pound of nitrogen this year, and all the way up to $1, depending on when you got that price locked in for 32 or 28005. So with that price being so inflated this year, and corn being $4 or even under $4, depending on the basis, it's important to know, okay, what is my return on that fertilizer dollar actually going to be?
We kind of want to talk about placement and where the best place would be to replace some nitrogen in your program. So really, when we start looking at it, and if you talk with your pivot us or another Pivot Bio rep or agronomist, the first thing they should do is look at your total program, go over it in depth with you, and let's figure out where your biggest inefficiencies are. You mentioned anhydrous. I mean, that's an easy one, which around here, there used to be a lot more gas being put on. There's not a ton. But that's a low-hanging fruit, especially when they're putting it on in the fall. It's like, hey, let's take 40 pounds out of that, because we know however many pounds they're putting on, who knows how much they're getting. It's not going to be 100%. So, and I know you could probably talk about that. I know you've seen some guys have had some success replacing that 40 pounds in anhydrous.
Yeah, there's even been some instances where we've replaced more than 40 pounds of anhydrous. But when it comes down to, okay, I've got a customer who's confident in Proven 40's ability to replace a true 40 pounds of a synthetic program, where they want to make that a part of their program, I want to know, like, okay, what are your current nitrogen applications? Because really, where that decision to replace is going to come, it's going to come from where's your least efficient nitrogen application right now. Because we're going to cut that out first, because we do want that highest NUE, nitrogen use efficiency score, that or I guess lowest in this case. The least amount of pounds per bushel that we can do. Because at the end of the day, that makes the farmer more profitable, and that's that's the whole goal. If we're not in the business of growing corn to make money, I guess none of this really matters. But since we are, it's, yeah, how can we replace that nitrogen that's already inefficient? So in cases where a lot of anhydrous is applied, especially fall anhydrous, we know we're probably only getting 60%, maybe 70% of that nitrogen into the plant anyways. And if it's a lot lower than that if we have a super dry fall and winter too, because a lot of that's going to be converted, it's going to be lost. So that nitrogen there is kind of an easy decision with anhydrous. After I get through that, or let's say we're working with a customer who doesn't have anhydrous in their nitrogen program, and they're just all liquid, or maybe a little bit of dry. In that scenario, I'm going to be looking at, okay, where do we have the most risk with those pounds of nitrogen? And a lot of times it's, if we're in lower CEC soils, we can't hold a whole lot of nitrogen at any given time. So if we're running risk from being able to hold 60 pounds, but in one application of a Y drop, we're putting on 90 pounds or 80 pounds of nitrogen per acre, then I know that 20 pounds is pretty easy to reduce in that Y drop scenario, because that's where we're running the most risk of losing that nitrogen.
It's time for a crop nutrition plan that gets more return from every drop. Starting with Pro Germinator from AgroLiquid, a complete phosphorus fertilizer product that includes nitrogen, potassium, and iron. More than 30 years of research shows that lower application rates of Pro Germinator often outperform other sources of fertilizer. With AgroLiquid's Pro Germinator, you can apply less and expect more. Find out more at agroliquid.com.
This last fall we did and I know you guys have talked about silage quite a bit already, but when we're back to the ROI thing, so he didn't want to replace a full 40, so he did 20. And he gave us scale tickets. He said, hey, this part of the field had pivot bio, this one didn't. And it's, what you could consider a quote unquote even field. I mean, there wasn't any elevation changes, same soil type. Really the only difference was they pulled 20 pounds out where there was pivot bio. And he ended up, after we did all the math, he ended up with after the cost of everything, he ended up with an $80 an acre ROI with the silage. And I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. That's, by the time you factor in the costs and taking out that synthetic and what he gained, it was like a 2.3 ton advantage, and he gave us all the scale. I mean, it was a mass, a big trial, I guess you could say. I mean, it's not like we did 1,000th of an acre and said, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This was a lot of acres. I mean, it was a big trial. And I mean, that was, there's obviously something there if you see that big of a difference in a field that was basically the same throughout the whole. That was the only difference was pivot bio.
Right. And a lot of times in silage, where we've seen the best ROI for the farmer is when we don't reduce the full 40. And I think the reason is the way excess nitrates are stored in the leaves. You pick that up in silage from a yield standpoint, but you don't necessarily in grain yield when you have excess nitrogen out there. So that is, I'm glad you brought that up, because with silage, we can replace some nitrogen, especially if we know we're, inefficient with some of that synthetic nitrogen. But usually we just recommend 20 to 30 pounds, because that's where we've seen, you will get a little bit of a tonnage increase just by having extra nitrates out there for the plant to store in those leaves and in the stock.
Yeah. And, something that's overlooked a little bit, one of our silage growers, one of the benefits they have seen is it extends their window of when they can get to the fields, because it's not drying down as quick, because all of a sudden they start getting in a rush and they got to get to one field after the next where they can get that ideal moisture that they're looking for. And something that he brought up, which is crucial to them, it's delaying that maturity a little bit. It's widening their window. It's that plant is not crashing near as fast. And that's really helped them. So they're able to extend their harvest window and get to these or harvest these fields when they need to, instead of hurrying. They're missing out on where their moisture needs to be because it's too dry, and so that's a huge benefit too. But yeah, I guess we've covered silage a lot. But anyway, where I wanted to get back to before I forget is one recommendation I'd make. I would not, and I get your thoughts. So I would not take it out of the side dress. We've done that before, and it's just a great place to put your nitrogen where you need it.
And it's banded nitrogen too, so you're gonna be more efficient with that nitrogen. And that's where, like, the only time I would reduce side dress nitrogen, I wouldn't completely eliminate it. So, and I actually just had this conversation with the farmer yesterday. If you're applying 20 or 30 pounds and your soil can hold that much at any given time, which that would be like a 2 cc, so hopefully everyone can, hold that. I wouldn't reduce that at all. But if you're applying 80 and you can hold 60, that's where I think, okay, maybe we dial back that side dress a little bit and also save you a pass through the pivot. And then I guess onto the pass through the pivot, if we're applying side dress nitrogen, I want to replace that next pass through the pivot. That V7, V10, V12 pass, I don't want to reduce or replace the nitrogen that's coming at R2, because at that point, the pivot biomicrobes are kind of starting to tail off because they're receiving less root exudates and sugars from the plant. So they're starting to taper off a little bit, and the nitrogen they're actually fixing from the air. And so that R2 application of nitrogen, I don't want to touch that, because late season nitrogen, we've seen, and just even before we were testing biological products, like just that application alone really helps that grain fill period and making sure we're not running short of nitrogen when we're trying to pack that kernel full of starches.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one of the common misconceptions. Is like, so when am I? It's like it's 40 pounds. So when am I getting that 40 pounds? Or is it like 5 pounds per week? It's like that's a great point, because you kind of, even when you're talking to somebody about it, you kind of forget to explain how, like, when that is being delivered. So yes, it's on the seed. It's not like you get 40 pounds delivered at one time, or it's like 20 this week, 20 next week. It's just, it's a curve, because that biology, those bacteria, they grow with the roots. So they colonize on those roots. So it just, by the time, they have to reproduce, and then they start putting out little by little by little. So you slowly start building that curve. And, when the roots are the, strongest, the biggest, around that tassel time, that's when you have the most colonization, I guess you could say. So that's when you're getting your biggest shot. So, it's slow. I mean, it's just kind of pumping out little by little, and, it keeps increasing with as the roots get bigger, and that biggest shot is going to be from, that V10 to, R1 probably. And then, the plant's starting to, reproduce, and as the sugars from the plant, the plant doesn't need it as much. So, I mean, that relationship's still there, but it's kind of separating.
Nextgen Fertilizers is introducing SeedLink, the game-changing planter box product that's revolutionizing corn planter box products. SeedLink delivers uniform emergence like never before, so every seed gets the perfect start. It's packed with phosphorus, humic and fulvic acids, amino acids, and beneficial biology. And the best part, SeedLink is half the cost of most of the other competitive products, even with more in it. We're not just applying biology here, we're actually applying biology with a food source. Use SeedLink on your corn today and get better emergence, better results, and all for a better price. It really is when that plant starts to transition of, okay, now I need to take everything that I already have and move that from wherever it is in the plant and move it to the ear, move it to those
Right,
kernels.
yeah.
And so it's not necessarily going out and really trying to search for nutrients in the soil. And like the other good thing that you brought up, or kind of reminded me to mention too, is that now with additional testing over the last 6 years, and this holds true with what we've seen locally too when we're doing our Reese and Evans test, but Pivot Bio wants guys to realize, you're getting like less than a half a pound of nitrogen per day. So it's just a really light spoon feed up until you get to that V10 growth stage. And then, at its peak, you're getting a full pound a day for about 30 days, really. That V10 to VT, there's a whole month there where you're getting like a pound a day, and then it tapers off. But you are getting that full 40. It's just, it comes in that slow spoon feed. So it's not like having a 40-pound shot out there all in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the biggest misconceptions. So I think we hit on kind of where to replace synthetic and your goals. Another point is, there's guys that are just terrified to cut back, and if nitrogen is not your limiting factor, and you are unwilling to cut back, and some people are, it's just kind of how they've been wired for a long time. It's just, honestly, Pivot Bio is probably not for you then. It's just, you're not, at the end of the day, the agronomic decisions, like if you're not willing to cut back and really dial in your nitrogen, you're kind of wasting your money. I mean, if you're that scared to get away from synthetic and will not reduce, I mean, it's not for you at the end of the day.
Right. And we don't want to give a farmer a bad recommendation. So that's where, it really comes back to, the integrity we try to have, in that, okay, if you're not going to reduce, like, you basically got a 50-50 chance that the product's even going to pay for itself. So if you're not going to replace, maybe we need to be looking at other products, or, maybe we need to go back to your soil samples and figure out where else you can improve on, what's your true limiting factor, because it's likely not going to be nitrogen. One last quick thing I wanted to mention. This is something we've seen for a couple years now, but there's a big difference in nitrogen use efficiency based on soil type. And we have a lot of fields with variability in them, whether it's a hilltop or, sometimes our highest yielding areas aren't even the bottoms. They're actually the side hills. And maybe that's because we're getting some runoff fertilizer or nutrients. But I think for the most part, it all comes down to water. And when you live in an arid climate like we do, and you've got, your variable rating, your population, or your seeding population, you have different yield goals even within the same field. So what we've seen, we actually did this last year on two different farmers, similar nitrogen programs, but one's trying to get 300 pounds out there, one's only trying to get 250, just because their yield goals vary that much. Very different approaches to how do I maximize, my profit per acre. And what we saw on both those fields, even though they were, different programs, is that we were actually getting a 10 bushel bump on the hills, which we were wetter in 2025 last year. So those hilltops probably did lose some nitrogen because we had, 4 or 5 inches of rain in just like a 2 or 3 week period in June, which we typically don't get that. But the year that we did in 2025, we were seeing a 10 bushel bump on the hills, but then where we had nitrogen replaced and ran Pivot Bio in the bottoms, there was no yield difference, which that was good. Okay, so Pivot Bio was parity. But then where we replaced 25 pounds, or 25 or 30 pounds, I can't even remember what it was, or 35 pounds, and didn't have Pivot Bio in the side hills and the bottoms, so a little heavier soils, there was no yield drag for replacing that synthetic nitrogen, even without the presence of Pivot Bio. So there was enough nitrogen there just from synthetic. Like Pivot Bio did nothing in the bottom, so that kind of raises up the whole discussion of, well, does it make sense to variable rate Pivot Bio on some areas, and just put those in the lower CEC areas of the field? And I think it definitely does make sense if you're over applying synthetic nitrogen, just as a general rule of thumb. If you're not, then like for the farmer that had 250 pounds synthetic program, and it was shooting for a 260 bushel yield goal, that's where we did see a little bit of a yield drag, where he didn't have Pivot Bio but still reduced synthetic nitrogen.
Yeah, that was especially to the grow. I mean, that was pretty eye opening. The two. I'm glad we did that. That was, which it helped wasn't too far from our office, so we could easily manage it a little bit to help them out. But I mean, that was having those two lessons in there from in the same field, two different soil types, elevations, conditions, and two very different results. And it's when you think about it, it's not really surprising either. I mean, we know he over applies.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it does. It was just like, oh, damn, that was, it's like, well, this could happen. It's like, well, it did,
Well, and maybe that's the biggest takeaway. We're not about just going out there and trying to push a product and say that it works on every acre and it works every time, and it'll always pay for itself regardless of what other management decisions you're making. I think the best good that can come from trialing or even implementing biological products is just a better understanding of nitrogen use efficiency in this case, but really the whole fertilizer program, because there's a lot of phosphorus solubilizing biological products out there in the market too now, and how efficient are we with our fertilizer dollars? And when you get in a year like this where you've got sub $4 corn and fertilizers, that cost per bushel ratio's the second worst it's ever been in basically ever since we started keeping track of that, 100 years ago. When that ratio is that far off, like that's where you better know what pays and what doesn't, and have a good grasp of, where your fertilizer dollars are actually paying you back and where you're just wasting them.
Yeah, no, that's a good point with the cost per bushel. That's that's huge right now. I mean, that's what's, if you don't have that dialed in, especially this year, I mean, that's the difference between you farming in 2027 versus sitting on the sidelines.
Right. It's pretty easy to get 5 more bushel. I mean, we've learned that, but does it cost you $10 to get there? Okay, maybe that makes sense. But if it costs you $30 to get that extra 5 bushel, then what are we doing? Like,
yeah,
we're really not helping our case at all for, from a profit per acre.
Right. That's, yeah. What is it costing you to get there? So, we kind of brag on a lot of the trials you did, and like we said, there's like 250 of them. So what's a couple of them that you have or stick out to you for better or for worse? A couple wins, a couple things that didn't go right. I mean, what's a couple that stick out in your mind? And also, you can find these on our website as well at nextgenfertilizers.com. There's should be a link to look at our trial results for the last 6 or however long we've been doing, 6 years.
I think 5 years to publish. This is our 6th year.
They're all on the website if you guys want to look through all of them. There's, like I said, there's a bunch.
At the end of the day, just be working with a good agronomist and a good fertilizer salesman, and just to make sure you have a good fertility program going into it. And I think there's a lot of these different products that work when it comes to biologicals. It's just, do we put them in a place where they can truly succeed and provide value? And if you're not doing that, then you're better off not running them. If you're not making them fit into your program.
Yeah. Well, just like Hefty say, I mean, just try it on 5% of your farm, 10%. and do a really good job of looking at it. And, employ your Pivot Bio, the guy you buy Pivot Bio from, your agronomist, to get some help to actually look at it. I mean, that's not just Pivot Bio, but I mean, a lot of other products, but just, have a good trial on 5 to 10% of your acres and see what it can do for you.